Hello everybody, I'm Richard Older, and once again, welcome to the channel. That's right, we always want you here, but while you're here, make sure, like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, do all that stuff so you get notified when I do all this testing, because I'm here constantly. I try to load stuff up every day, and you know what? You don't want to miss out. Today we're talking about low buck versus mo buck. That's right, everybody wants a good deal on stuff, and big block Chevy cylinder heads are a perfect example. We all want a super high flowing set of aluminum cylinder heads that make lots of power so we can put them on our cam junkyard motor, right? Yes. But do we always get what we pay for? What happens if we compare a set of low dollar offshore aftermarket aluminum heads that don't cost very much, and we compare them to a set of heads, a known established set, more expensive set of heads that do cost more, but generally offer more power? So the question is, if the more expensive head does offer more power, how much power is that? And then only you guys can decide if it does offer more power and it costs more money, is it still a good deal? Okay guys, I'm going to jump right in and on a big block Chevy show you the old adage that sometimes you get what you pay for, and sometimes paying a little more for something, you get not just a little more, but a lot more. And cylinder heads are a perfect example. So I'm going to show you on a 468-inch motor that we built up to do a cylinder head test. The difference between some inexpensive heads, in this case these came from ProComp, there are obviously other examples, and then getting a, kind of a more of a high dollar brand name head, in this case they're airflow research heads. But the interesting thing is, I want you to pay attention to this, is that take a look at the difference in port volumes that we're talking about. One of these heads is like a 320cc head. The other one's a 265cc head. And yet, the smaller head makes more power everywhere. So it's interesting. Let me know in the comments what you guys think. Should a big port always make more power than a small port? What about the flow rates? What about all that stuff? Obviously, it all comes into play. But let's jump in and talk about our test motor, because it's the motor that you test things on has a big effect on what the ultimate outcome is going to be. So this was a 468-inch motor. It's a motor that I built and put together. It had a 20 or 22cc dome piston. It was a forged rotating assembly. It had a set of forged rods in it. We had a pretty good sized camshaft in it. It was a Mark IV. This is an early motor. We had a pretty good sized cam in it. It was a 248, 254 at 50, 560, 580 lift, 110 degree lobe separation. It was an extreme energy hydraulic roller camshaft from Comp Cams. We used their lifters and timing chain and all that stuff too. We had good size headers, 2 1/4 our dyno headers on it. We had some gold aluminum roller rockers on it. We had a big deep oil pan on it, which works very well. This is actually we were thinking about maybe for a boat application, but it was for these deep oil pans. Worked very well, especially with the integrated windage trays and stuff, which we had from Milodon. We had an Edelbrock Victor Jr. 454O intake manifold on it, and this one was port matched. We had a 950 Holley carburetor on it. It actually was a pretty good match to the airflow research heads, but also a good match to, surprisingly, a fairly good match to the peanut port heads, to the entry of the peanut port heads as well. And it was the intake manifold was actually slightly smaller than the intake opening on the bigger 320cc Speedmaster big block heads. So we ran these heads, ran our combination with 3 different sets of heads. We started out with a stock peanut port head because I hadn't done a lot of testing at the time with peanut port. So I wanted to establish that as a baseline, since there are a lot of those out there running around. And any other factory oval port head, like an 049 and stuff, for those things are getting hard to find. So I think fewer people would actually have that as a starting point. But you can kind of figure out where you would be if you had a little bit better set of heads and not a lot better set of heads like we're going to talk about here. But so we ran our combination after we dialed in the air, fuel, and timing. We ran it first with a set of peanut port heads, and this combination produced 512 horsepower and slightly more torque, 514 foot-pounds. And this should tell you right away, hey Richard, this thing is making a little bit more torque than horsepower. we've got something limiting us here. It's not the displacement, it's not the compression, it's not the camshaft, and it's probably not the intake manifold, because we made a lot more power with the 454O intake manifold, the Victor Jr. intake manifold. The carburetor is plenty sizable for this power level. So what are we missing here? Well, we're missing cylinder heads. The first thing we're going to take a look at is what happened when we installed a set of Speedmaster oval port as cast heads. They had a valve job done on it. They had a valve spring upgrade to work with this camshaft. And obviously they bolted right on, and all that worked out well. And they did indeed pick up power. In fact, the peak power went from 511 horsepower. That's where we were at. 511.5 up to 554 horsepower. Yeah, 553.9. So they did well. They picked up a fairly good bit of power. Peak torque was up to 527 foot-pounds. Peak torque happened quite a bit later. As you can see, the Speedmaster heads did flow a good bit more than the factory oval port heads, or the factory peanut port heads. And so they did offer more power. They didn't show big gains from 3,500 to 4,700. And they were actually a little bit better below that than the peanut port heads, which was kind of surprising, which is one of the things that you find out when you test. But now let's take a look and see what happens when we install the Airflow Research 265 heads. Okay, guys, now that we've taken a look at what happens when we install a set of, reasonably priced aluminum heads on a big block Chevy, and we got gains from the Speedmaster heads compared to the peanut port heads on our canned 468, reasonably healthy combination, we saw it made like 550 horsepower or so with the aluminum heads on it. That's a good combination. Let's find out what happens when you step up to something that has even more potential, but it obviously costs more money. So you guys get to decide. Let me know in the comments, is spending a little more to get a little more worth it? I mean, let me know in the comments what you guys think. Or is there another alternative for something like an Airflow Research or another CNC head? Is there a lesser expensive alternative that would make like the same kind or maybe even slightly less power? Let me know in the comments. But let's jump to our results here. We had our peanut port head on our 468 with the comp cam in it, 511 or 12 horsepower, 514 foot-pounds. Here's what happened when we put our Airflow Research 265 heads on there. Picked up a lot of power. In fact, it picked up more than 100 horsepower, which is pretty good. So we went from 511 or 512 up to 613. So we'll call that 101 horsepower gain. It's revving fairly nicely all the way out to 6,500, which is not really high, but enough to make it sound really good when you're, behind the wheel. Also note that unlike the Speedmaster head, the bigger Speedmaster head, the Airflow Research didn't lose power or didn't even make the same power as the peanut port head in this lower middle part of the curve. So from 3,500 to 4,500, the Airflow Research still made more. At some points, it was only 12 or 13 foot-pounds more, but let's face it, more and more is more. And most of the gains came past 43 or so 100 RPM, and then the thing kind of really climbed on the big end. This is an interesting thing because a 265cc intake port is not what guys, especially for a big block Chevy, would consider very, very big. In fact, a lot of guys are really stuck on the fact that because of what happened, because of the information that most of us were fed back in from the muscle car era, when GM offered both oval port and rec port heads, the oval ports they put on the more pedestrian, lower performance versions. And then all of the big power stuff, the L78s, the L72s, the LS6s, and the L88s, all of those got the high performance rec port stuff. So we associate high performance and flow and power with rec port heads, and associate low performance or even moderate performance, I guess, with oval port heads. But the reality is you can make a lot of power with an oval port head. We have combinations that have been put together and tested at West Tech that have made over 800 horsepower with other versions of oval port heads, particularly the Airflow Research stuff, the 290 and 300 stuff. They will make a lot of power. So don't get caught up in the oval port versus rec port thing. If you're trying to make 1,000,000 horsepower, get a cylinder head that flows enough to support 1,000,000 horsepower. But know that, like, most guys wouldn't pick a 265 head for a 600 horsepower build. They'd probably pick some kind of rec port. But you can easily do that. And not only that, when you do it with this kind of 265, the small port head, you get lots of power potential on the top, but also you don't lose any power down low. So now what I want to do is, obviously you guys would want to know, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of our stock peanut port head, and let's compare the airflow research to the Speedmaster head. And you can see that the airflow research is kind of better everywhere. It's better down low because we know that the Speedmaster head was kind of just equaling in this middle part, the Speedmaster head was just equaling the peanut port head. And then the Speedmaster head was better on the top end, but not as much, excuse me, not as much top end as the airflow research head. So we have a difference of going between, 554 horsepower to 614. So we got a good change in power. So the question now is, yes, we got more power from the airflow research head, but it probably also costs more. So is the juice worth the squeeze? Would you spend the extra money to get another 50 horsepower or so? And how much is that worth to you guys? Only you guys can answer that, so let me know in the comments. Our shareholder, please make sure like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, do all that stuff. And I got lots of testing just like this coming up.